Ruth's analysis, and you'll find me at thinkingaloud at bbc.co.uk. Every house will be saffron, the rule of Rama will come. Well, those are the lyrics of a song by Lakshmi Dubey, a star in what's come to be known as the saffron pop scene, the soundtrack to a set of policies that are seeking to transform the secular and pluralistic nation of India into more and more of a Hindu state. Well, to help me understand this upsurge in Hindu nationalism, I'm joined by Christophe Jaffrelot, who's Professor of Indian Politics and Sociology at King's College, London. You've listened, I think, to Ruth's interview. I wonder whether you see Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who began his second term of office in 2019, as fitting into her pantheon of strongmen leaders and authoritarian rule.
There are many reasons why Narendra Modi fits in this list of strongmen, but a very important distinction, to my mind, needs to be made between the authoritarian rulers who can lose elections and the others. Mussolini, Hitler, Gaddafi, Mobutu could not lose elections, and Putin cannot lose elections either today. By contrast, Erdogan, Modi, Bolsonaro may lose elections, and we may wonder why. Why do they take the risk of organizing such elections? And the obvious reason is sometimes they can't avoid doing so because there are still checks and balances. But there is, to my mind, another reason. They have become strong men through an electoral process as the voice of the people in the name of democracy. For me, we see today the making of a new political regime, a regime that is certainly authoritarian, but in which the leader needs to take the risk of some election. Of course, he will try not to lose by distorting the electoral process. So politics is not a level playing field anymore because of the money they spend, because of corruption, because of the biased media. But still, there is some competition. And therefore, we have a populist regime because this is what the populist does. He gets the mandate from the people.
Let me ask you a little about Modi's route to power, how he has used Hindu nationalism in his route to power.
He is a pure product of the Hindu nationalist movement, the RSS, that he has joined as a child when he was 7 years old. And he has become a cadre of this organization is in home state, Gujarat, in western India. It's only in 2001 that he has been parachuted head of the government of Gujarat, even though he had never been elected before. His party, the BJP, was losing all the by-elections. And in less than 6 months after becoming head of the state government, the state of Gujarat has been devastated by Hindu-Muslim violence that resulted in the death of 2,000 Muslims, and Modi could appear as a strong man at that time.
He's in a way portraying Muslims in the States as a sort of fifth column for Pakistan, as I understand it.
Of course.
He says, I'm the only person who can protect residents from terrorist threats from Pakistan.
And that is the first achievement he could claim, saying, I'm protecting the Hindus from Muslims, from Islamists, from Pakistan. And there was a war in 1965 between Pakistan and India in Gujarat, and people remember. So that's in his rise to power, in his route to power, a major episode. Then, soon after, he befriended businessmen who have always been very influential in Gujarat. He gave them special economic zones, and they gave him money to contest elections. And this, I would say, alchemy between, on the one hand, Hindu majoritarianism, and on the other hand, economic dynamism, were the two ingredients of his 2014 campaign when he contested for the post of Prime Minister and was elected for the first time Prime Minister of India.
So this is a sort of new form of democracy which considers the majoritarian community synonymous with the nation. So Muslims, Christians get turned into second-class citizens.
Yes, this is why we can apply the concept of ethnic democracy to India today. Of course, there are elections, some rule of law, but there is also a majority community that is defined by religion/language, and this majority prevails over the minorities who do not enjoy the same rights. India is a de facto ethnic democracy because on the paper, in the constitution, secularism remains the law, but de facto, Muslims and Christians will find difficult to find a flat in a mixed neighborhood. They will find it difficult to marry a Hindu. And these groups also try to reconvert Muslims and Christians. We are transitioning in India from a de facto ethnic democracy to a de jure one, because for long there was no law making it so difficult for Hindus and Muslims to marry. Now there are laws, and not only in Uttar Pradesh, the largest state of India that is ruled by the BJP, but in others now. Several states have adopted the same law. It's against what they call love jihad, because in fact they suspect Muslim boys to seduce Hindu girls, to marry them, to convert them, and to produce Muslim babies. So this is something we saw also in the West with this idea that demography is a problem. Muslims are proliferating. But I repeat, what is very interesting in this case is that it's not de facto only. It is the law that is changing. And that is something we saw also in 2019 when the government introduced the Citizenship Amendment Act, because that law was in fact making the Muslim refugees from Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Pakistan not eligible to Indian citizenship. So for the first time, religion became a criterion for citizenship just after the re-election of Narendra Modi.
Well, I've got a clip here. This is from a BBC News report of the Delhi riots on February the 27th, 2020.
Fear. As tensions remain high in Delhi. The national capital, a battleground. Violent clashes between Hindus and Muslims have rocked the city for days. Entire neighbourhoods ripped apart as mobs roam the streets. The riots have been centred in the northeast of the city, in largely Muslim neighbourhoods.
Now, over 50 people, I understand, were killed in those riots, two-thirds of whom were Muslim. And I should say that Modi did condemn that violence. But let me ask you about the extent to which you think that Modi has undermined democracy during his rule.
Power is centralized in the hands of very few men, at the expense of the party, the BJP, at the expense of parliament, and at the expense of federalism. India is a union of states, according to the Constitution of India. But the state governments have not been consulted. For instance, before Modi took the major decision of imposing a lockdown in 2020, there was no consultation. Power is not only personalized, it's also concentrated. Secondly, the opposition and the media have been victims of all kinds of intimidation, including raids by the fiscal administration, or in the case of journalists, arrests for sedition under very stringent laws like the National Security Act. That's another clearly authoritarian transformation. And on the top of it, of course, the resources on the side of the ruling party makes very difficult for the opposition to compete. In 2019, BJP spent $3.6 billion to win the elections. Nobody could compete with these kind of expenditures.
To what extent does Modi fit this pattern of the authoritarian leader?
If you look at the personality of Narendra Modi, you will find affinities with some of these authoritarian personalities, in the sense that he doesn't accept dissent. You have this cult of personality that is very, very deep-rooted now in BJP. And that goes, by the way, with a form of narcissism that is very evident from the way he dresses, the way he speaks, especially when he speaks in public, of course. last but not least, this idea that you are bound to change history, which means that you do big things, good or bad. This is also one of the characteristics of a strong man.
Because when I was speaking to Ruth about whether or not you could describe a leader as authoritarian, if this person had been chosen by the electorate, I mean, isn't Modi backed by popular consent?
Democracy is not only based on elections. The other is rule of law, independence of the judiciary, checks and balances.
What are the chances, as you see it in the current climate, for a revival of India's once much more inclusive democracy?
The strength of Hindu majoritarianism is such that for the moment, any alternative seems to be illegitimate, at least at the national level. To return to a more inclusive democracy, as you say, you have to replace the dominant identity politics of Hindu nationalism by socioeconomic issues. There may be a lot of discontent because of joblessness, because of growing inequalities. The risk of a popular movement is very high. Indian democracy may be rejuvenated.
And there I think we must stop. Christophe Jaffrelot, thank you very much. And thank you for listening. Thinking Aloud is produced in partnership with the Open University. Next week's topic, footwear, the magic and the material reality. Do join me for that. That was a Thinking Aloud podcast from BBC Radio 4. You'll find a treasure trove of other Thinking Aloud programmes on BBC Sounds.